Hello everyone, today I want to show you how to create that procedural decoration plant or decoration flower with geometry nodes. Of course you can deform the vase, you can bend the stems, and of course you can change the bending and the orientation of the little blossom leaves here and many things more. So if you know how to create that, just watch that video. So we will start again with our default cube, activate it and click on Geometry Nodes tab, and we will create a new Geometry Nodes setup. Disconnect input from the output, and first of all we are going to create our vase, and therefore we are going to create a cylinder and connect it to the output so that we can see something. And we want to work in real size measurements, so we will use radius from about 0.05 and the depth will be maybe 30 centimeter. That will be 0.3 meters. And let's increase the vertices. No, we can leave that. The side elements we can increase because later on we want to deform it, something like that. And the fill segments like 10 until we get to something like this. Now that's our basic vase, and we want to delete the top of it. So to delete something, of course we need a delete geometry nodes object, and we want to delete the face, and we want to delete in selection the top of our cylinder. That's pretty comfortable that we have such an output at the cylinder node. So now we've got the base mesh of our vase, and now we want to give it some thickness, and we could do that now with a modifier, with a solidify or skin modifier, but we can also use an extrude mesh node. The result is a little bit different. You can try out what fits better to your imagination. We go with an extrude mesh node, and we don't want to extrude it individual. We want to extrude it all at once, and we want to extrude it only a little bit. Therefore we go with 0.004. So that's only a small change. And now we can give it some subdivision surface, and we can set it to Z shade smooth. So it looks pretty cool. There's a little bit ugly is here the inner side where is no bevel, but I think we can live with that. So now the problem is that our vase is right in the middle of the 0 point, and of course we want to position it with the bottom to the 0 point, and to do that we will need a transform node, and to position it just in the half of the height upwards, we can use a value node, and that value node we type in 0.3. That's the value of the depth. And now we can add a combine X, Y, Z node and a math node. The math node we set to divide by 2 and connect our height with the divide node. Connect that with the Z channel, and we connect this with a translation. and of course we have to change from add to divide. And there's a little small problem because we extruded our mesh, and maybe we can extrude it to the inner side. No, that looks terrible too. So something like that, and we have to add the math node, and we add 0.004, and now it's exactly on the 0 plane. And to make everything in relation, we can type in 0.004 and connect that with our height, and the same we can do with our add node. So now we can have full control about the height and the positioning on the 0 Z axis. So now it's time to add some material to our vase. Set material, and I've already prepared something. I think I called it Vase. I think we can switch in the 3D mode, 3D viewport mode. No, how's it called? The viewport shading mode. Let's have a quick look at our material. The material is a texture coordinate set to generate it, a mapping node to have full control about the mapping, a Voronoi texture set to 3D, F1 and Euclidean, and a bump texture. So really standard basic. Of course you can use any material you like to, but I thought that looks like a pretty cool design IKEA vase, and the principled BSDF, the roughness is set to some lower values, and transmission, we don't need that, of course. So now that's my material for the vase. Let's jump back to our geometry nodes, and now it's time to create the stems of the flowers within our vase. So first we are going to group our vase, set a frame around it, like that. Hit Control J, and we will rename it to Vase. And now it's time for our plants. First of all, we are going to create the stem, and to do that I will disconnect the vase so that we can see what we are now creating. So we will start with a curve line. And we will set this to, it will start at -0.25 and will end at, let me quickly check my notes, 0.3. Let's connect it with our group input. Let's create a join geometry node. And we connect our curve with our join geometry node. Where is it? There it is. And as you can see, we got some curve line. The reason why I let it start at a minus point is because later on we will set it with a transform node or that position node a little bit higher, but we'll come to that later on. And now we need a resample curve node because we want to give it a higher resolution, because we want to bend it later on and give it some noise distortion. So maybe we can set it to about 15. And now we will need a set position node. And now we will give it some noise distortion, and therefore we will need a noise texture. We will need a vector math node, and we are going to set the vector math node to subtract, and we can duplicate it and set it to multiply, and we need a spline parameter node. Sorry, spline, where is it? Spline parameter node, and we can connect the length with the lower vector, the color with the upper input, and that one with the upper input too. And now we can set it to 4D in case we want to animate it. Scale we can set to 0.11. These are values I figured out that fits best for the size of that stem, but of course you can later on try your own values. 0.7 and the distortion is 0.2, and now we connect that with our offset. And I forgot to change the subtract to 0.5, 0.5 and 0.5. That will bring the distortion, the noise texture, some kind of distortion, and it moves the our curve line away from the midpoint. Maybe I can show it. So it's moved away, and to bring it back to the 0 point, I subtract 0.5 from each distance, from each vector, so it's approximately, again, in the midpoint. It's depending on the noise texture, of course, and the spline parameter is therefore because we don't want to have our distortion about along the full length of our stem. We only want to make it distorted at the end of it. And as we can, as we animate it, you can see the 0 point is not animated at all. There is no distortion, and the endpoint is distorted the most. So I will turn back to 0.15. So we got now we got a little distortion on our stem. So maybe you can distort it a little bit more, but I think that's a pretty realistic distortion of a stem for a plant. So next thing is we are going to create the stem bending, and to that we will copy that set position node, and now we can create our stem bending. For those of you who have seen my grass tutorial, I now use the same node tree as for my grass bending. First of all, I think we are going to group that, hit Ctrl J, and rename that stem distortion. Now we are going to create the stem bending. And to create that, we will need several nodes. First of all, we will start with a vector rotate node. Vector rotate. We will need a position node. We will need a math node, which we set to multiply. We will need an index node. We will need another math node. We can copy that, which we'll set to divide. And we will need a value node. These two nodes are only there because the vector rotate node is very sensitive, and we need the divide node to get better control of it. So we set it divide to 100 and plug the value into our division node, and we set it to maybe 5. Now the index, I will explain that soon. The index will go into the upper value of the multiply node and that one to the lower one. And now we can plug in the multiply to the angle, and the position gives us the position of every vertex of our stem will go into a vector. Now we can plug that in our position input, and now we should have some stem bending, and that does not work properly because we have to define the axis the bending is around. So we change this from x-axis to axis angle to x-axis, and now we can see that we have some bending of our stem and some noise distortion in it. So as you can see here, some distortion, and we have control about the bending. So next thing is we are going to to give it some thickness. So first of all, we are going to group that and rename it to stem bending. We are going back to our stem, and now we need a set curve radius node, and we will need a curve to mesh node. Curve to mesh node, where is it? Curve to mesh node. And now we will need a curve cycle node, and the curve cycle node will be curve circle node. The curve circle node will be the profile of our curve to mesh. We can plug that into profile curve. And because our stem is very small, very thin, we can type in 0.0002. Maybe that's 0 too much, so that looks like a stem. And now we want to give it some we want to have control about the thickness and the shape, and we can achieve that with the set curve radius node. We will need a spline parameter node. Oh, by the way, I think I just forgot to explain the stem bending. So what we've got here is the index node. The index node gives us the position of every vertex of our stem, and the count of vertexes is defined by the resample curve value here. So we have all about 15 index points starting with 0, and what it does now is the first index point, you can imagine that as some kind of loop. The first index point is bended with 0. The second one is bended a little bit more. The second one even higher, and so on. And the upper point, the latest index point, is bended with the highest value. So that's how the stem bending is working. Now back to our spline parameter. That's something similar. The spline parameter gives us control from the start to the beginning, and to have control about that we can use a color ramp node. Plug in the factor into the factor and color into the radius, and as you can see now, at the beginning it's black is 0 and white is 1, and as we change that, it already looks like a normal stem. Maybe 0 is a little bit too small. We can increase that to something like that, only slight variation. So think that should be enough. And now it's time for some material. We can position that to the end, set material node, and of course I've already prepared something. It's called stem. Let's have a quick look at it. Where is it? Stem. Nothing fancy here too. So I started with a texture coordinate node, set it to object, a mapping node to have control about the scale. That goes into a noise texture with these values. I've created a bump node to give it some some stem-like bump. I don't know how to say it. And of course some color, and I've gave it some slight variation, so it looks hopefully pretty natural. Some brown shadings, and that goes into the base color. And I've also added some subsurface scattering, so that it maybe looks more natural. And that's all. So pretty basic material. Back to our geometry nodes. Now we can have a look how the vase and the stem is interacting, and we can see that the stem is a little bit too low in the z-axis, and we can change that when we change the position here. Let's make it into wired, and maybe we can set it to 0.2. No, that's too low. 0.25. I think 0.3 is the right one. And that already looks like one single stem and a plant. And the next thing we are going to create is the blossoms, the blossoms that are positioned at the end of our stem. But first we are going to make a new group. So that whole thing here will be our stem. Control J. And we will name that stem. And now it's time to create our blossom. And as base for our blossom, we will create an icosphere. Maybe I switch to another view. Yes, that's a little bit more comfortable. And now we are going to create an icosphere. We will have to make it a little bit smaller. Real size measurements, real world measurements, and maybe subdivisions to 3. Later on we will need a set position node. And now it's time to place the blossom on our stem. And to do that, we are going to create an instance on points node after our stem. Instance on points node. Maybe there. And as instance, we can use our icosphere. So we plug that in as instance, and as we can see, the icosphere is placed on every vertex of our stem, because of course we don't want that, and of course we want to see our stem. So we have to plug in after our set curve radius of our stem. One line is going to the points of the instances, and the other one is going directly into the joint geometry, so that we can see something. Or maybe no, sorry, we have to, after the curve to mesh, we have to plug in. We have to make a connection to the joint geometry, and now we can see our stem. So now, how do we can how do you manage that we only see our blossom on the top of our stem? Therefore, we can create a endpoint selection node, and when we plug that into our selection of our instance on points node, you can see nothing. Maybe I will turn again to the grid mode. And the reason we can't see anything now is because I connected the mesh with the instance on points node, and the mesh does not have any endpoints or start points. So we can fix that when we connect the curve with our instance on points node. And as we can see now, we got 1 point at the end and 1 point at the start, and we don't want the point at the start. Now we got one blossom at the end, and now it's time to make some blossom leaves. And to do that, we will start with a curve line. Curve line, there it is. And because we are working in real world measurements, again, it's a very small curve, 0.01. And now we bend it exactly the same like we bended our stem. Therefore, we will need a resample curve node. I will do that a little bit quicker than the rest, because it's just copy and paste the stem node. To connect the curve, and we'll set it to 10 is enough. We will need a set position node, and we will also need a noise texture to give it some random shape. That will only be a small shape, but when you look at it in detail, you will realize it. And the noise texture we will set to, let me take a quick look to my notes, about 1, 15, and what do we got here? 0.8, and the distortion about 2. And now we connect that with our offset. And because we want to see what we are doing there, let me increase the icosphere. And now let's add some distribute points on faces node. We plug the geometry of our icosphere in there, and we will need an we will need an instance on points node. Plug that right here. And now maybe first of all we hit Control J and rename that in blossoms, or blossom leaves. And now we connect our blossom leaves with the instance channel, and the instance channel goes into the instance on points node of our icosphere. That is the instance on points node of our icosphere. That means we are taking our blossom leaves and we are going to position them on that icosphere, that one here, and we take that whole icosphere with the single blossom leaves and going to distribute it on that instance on points node. That is the instance on points node that belongs to that single vertex point where our whole blossom is positioned. So we are going to plug that here into the distance, the instance, sorry, and now we can see anything because we did not create our blossom leaves, and the reason we can't see our icosphere is because we only see the instances now. Now we can change that by adding another join geometry node, and now we can plug in our set position node, and there we have our icosphere again with the non-existent blossom leaves because we didn't give them any depth yet. So back to our blossoms. We have already created a curve line, resembled it with resemble curve, set position, and gave it some noise. And now it's time to give it a radius. Set curve radius. And of course we want to give it some depth, and we'll do that with a curve to mesh node. And we will use again a curve circle, sorry, as profile. You could also use a circle line, of course, if you want to have a one-dimensional blossom leaf, but I decided to take a circle, curve circle, plug that into profile, and we will only need a low resolution, and that one will be really tiny, 0.0005. And the reason we still don't see any blossom leaves on our icosphere is because we are working on a very small area, and our density of 10 is just too small. So maybe we increase it to 1000 or to 10,000, and now you can see we got some blossom leaves. To have better control on that, we will create a math node with which we set to multiply by 1000, and we will create a value node, and now we have much better control of our blossom leaves. Now back to our leaves themselves. Now we have created a curve to mesh node with some radius, and now it still looks a little bit strange. We want to give it again some thickness on the start and make it thinner at the end, and therefore we will use again a spline parameter node and a color ramp. We will plug in the factor into the factor and output the color into the radius. And again, it's we have to switch it, something like that, and we've got some beautiful looking leaves with some random distortion. And of course, we want to rotate them along the normals because at the moment they are all looking to the Z direction, and to do that, maybe we group that first. Control J, and that will be our icosphere. No, icosphere blossom. So now we will add a rotate Euler node, and we will connect the rotation of our icosphere into the rotation input, and the output goes into the rotation. And as you can see, they are positioned along the normals, and now we want to give them some random scale. To do that, we need a random value node. plug that into scale and maybe minimum 0.8 and maximum 1.4, maybe something like that. And we crank up the density. And now the only thing we need is some bending, as we did with the stem. And to do some bending, we can copy exactly the same nodes as we did, as we created for our stem. Just copy and paste that whole frame. We can rename it to blossom bending instead of stem bending. Blossom bending. And the only thing we have to do now is create another set position node, and we will connect the rotate output, vector output, with the position. And now we got some cool looking flower that we can bend in all directions. The only thing that's still not correct is the orientation of our blossom. It should be more directed in that axis and not in directly up to the Z axis. And to change that, we can move a little bit upwards to the distribution of our blossoms on our leaves. So the point where we set the whole blossom on the stem and give it the position with the endpoint selection. And therefore now we need a rotate Euler node. Sadly, we don't have now a distribute points on faces node where we can plug in, where we can grab our rotation, our normal positions. We have to do it manually, but that's no problem. Just connect the rotate Euler output with the rotation, and now change it from object to local. And now I figured out some values that fit for my flower, for my blossom. These are minus 58, minus 17, and minus 13. And as you can see, where is it? That looks pretty orientated to the normal endpoint of the stem. Maybe it depends on the values you have chosen. You have to figure out some other values. Just rotate it that all the endpoints of the blossoms are positioned in the direction of that stem. The cool thing is all the other stems that will be distributed on the vase later on will all have the same rotation, because you can imagine that the blossom now is positioned on the not bended stem, and the bending happens with the already right orientated blossom. So now it's time to increase the distribution, the density of our flowers, of our stem with blossoms. And to do that, we have to create some kind of area where our stems and our whole flower is distributed on. And to do that, we will create a small grid. Now 1D grid, and we have to do that very small, 0.01 and 0.02. Of course, you can later on change that size when you have maybe a very big vase. But for now on, we will go with these values. We will need a set position node. we will need a distribute points on faces node. Faces node. And of course we will need a instance on points node. And now we can connect that with our mesh, with our points. Now we can use our whole Blossom node tree as input for our instance on points node. But before that, we can use our join geometry node output. We have to disconnect the vase from that input because we don't want to distribute our vase. And just copy and paste that join geometry node. And we have to reconnect our vase with our join geometry node. And now we can use our whole Blossom node tree that all comes together in that one join geometry node. We can use that as instance, and we connect the instance with our vase join geometry node. So we can see nothing because we need a realize instance node. And again, we have to increase our density because we are working on a very small area. And to have better control, we again need a math node, which we will set to 1000. And we will need a value node. And of course, we should not forget to change our math node from add to multiply. So now here are our flowers, our blossoms with stems. Now it's time to rotate them. So we need a random value node set to vector connected with the rotation. And first one set to the first two x and y set to 0 and only rotated around the z-axis. Maybe we can increase our number, and then again we maybe to give it some variations we can slightly rotate them around the x and the y-axis, maybe something like 0.09 and the 0.09. That gives us a slight variation, and duplicate the random value, set it to float, and connect that with our scale. And now the minimum scale can be maybe something like 0.8 and the maximum 1.1. You can play with that. Again, we can increase the density, so that looks pretty cool. Maybe we make a group around that and call that distribution of flowers. And now we are already finished. We have to give our blossoms a material. We forgot that. So go back to our blossom frame where we create our single blossom leaves, and we will create a set material node. And I've named that blossom. Let's have a quick look. Oh, that looks cool. And let's have a quick look at our blossom material. I created an object info node, which we used the random output and a color ramp. And I set the color ramp to constant and just created 4 colors. And plug that into my base color and give it some subsurface scattering. It depends on the thickness of your blossom leaves, and the subsurface scattering is why I have chosen the circle for my profile and not a circle line, because I wanted to use subsurface scattering. What that random node does is that it gives every new instance of the blossom a new color, and you can play with it. And I will add another one, maybe blue, and as you can see, it turns blue. Let's delete it again. That's all, so nothing fancy again. And I think we forgot to get our stem the right color. No, there it is. We just ignored our set material node, and we will fix that. Yes, like that. Instead of connecting the curve to mesh node with our joint geometry node, we connect our set material node. And now we are pretty done with our vase. Maybe increase the density of our leaves. Maybe something like that. Looks a little bit fuller, more natural. And to get even more randomness and natural look to it, you could now copy and paste your whole stem with blossom node tree, and copy it once or twice, and give the stems some variation in the thickness and so on. But I think it already works. We have some flowers, and you can control the blossom size by controlling the icosphere size. Something like that. Looks strange. You can control the bending of the leaves with that value here. So it instantly gives us a totally different image of our flowers. So that was the tutorial of the procedural decoration plant. Hope you enjoyed it and learned something. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to leave some comments in the comment section, and hope I see you soon again. Bye.